If you like my story reading, please subscribe my channel. I can read 3. The Josephina Story Quilt. Josephina. It was May 1850. Faith was excited. They were going to California in a covered wagon. Please, Faith asked Ma, can I take Josephina? Josephina was her pet hen and Faith loved her. She liked the way Josephina snuggled in her arms. She liked the way Josephina followed her around. Ma was baking bread for the long journey. Ask your pa, she said. Pa and Faith's brother Adam were loading the wagon. Please, Pa, Faith said. Please, can I take Josephina? There's no room in the wagon for pets, Pa said. That isn't fair, said Faith. Adam can bring his colt. A colt is not a pet, said Pa. A colt can carry a load of corn. What can Josephina do? Teased Adam. She is too old to lay eggs and too tough to eat. Faith's eyes filled with tears. She ran back to the house. Ma sat down in a rocker and held Faith on her lap. We all must leave things behind, she said gently. I love this rocker, but there's no room for it in the wagon. Faith gulped down her sobs. I have looked after Josephina since she was a little chick, she said. What will happen to her? Perhaps a neighbor will take her, said Pa, but nobody wanted a hen that was too old to lay eggs and too tough to eat. California Ho! Early in the morning, the wagon was ready. It had blue trim and a white cloth roof. Ma stood back to admire it. A big flower pot on wheels, she said. Isn't it beautiful? Faith did not answer. She was worried about Josephina. Did you pack the food? Ma asked Pa. And my kitchen things? Pa nodded. Then that is everything except the bedding, said Ma. Faith thought sadly. And Josephina. Pa threw mattresses into the wagon. Ma carefully spread their patchwork quilt over them. We can't leave these behind, she said. All our joys and sorrows are sewn up in the patches. Faith picked up Josephina and held her close. We can't leave my hen either, she said. Josephina must stay, Pa said. So put her down. Faith just stood there. She stroked Josephina's feathers and tried hard not to cry. Ma gave Pa a special look. Ma sighed. All right, Faith, he said, but if she makes any trouble, out she goes. Thank you, Pa, cried Faith. She will be good, I promise. Faith put Josephina in her cage. Pa hung it high up at the back of the wagon. Then he lifted Faith up next to it. Ma handed her the rag bag. Work on a patch whenever you can, she said. Faith knew how important the quilts were for remembering. California ho! Shouted Pa. He snapped his long whip. Crack! The oxen began to move. Their bells tinkled. The heavy wagon chain clanked, and the wheels began their creaky song. Faith smiled happily at Josephina. This would be their home on the long trail west. Faith took some calico from the rag bag. I will make my first wagon train patch, she said. Faith began to sew a wagon wheel with careful, tiny stitches. Trouble! At night, the wagons made a circle around the animals. Women cooked the meals over a campfire. Afterward, there was singing and banjo music. Faith put down the wagon wheel patch and let Josephina out for a stretch. Suddenly, woof! A dog ran up to Josephina and barked fiercely at her. Josephina squawked and ran. Come back, yelled Faith. But it was too late. Josephina was in the middle of the animals. Horses snorted and reared. Cows kicked and mooed. Oxen bellowed. That pesky hen, Pa shouted and ran after her. She almost started a stampede, Pa said angrily. Out she goes. Please, Pa, begged Faith. Give her one more chance. It was the dog's fault. Faith is right, said Ma. I saw the whole thing. Pa put Josephina back in her cage. Just one more chance, he said. That night, Faith whispered, Josephina, please try to be good. Cluck, 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 said the hen. They understood one another as true friends do. The rescue. For a long time, Josephina was good. She quietly watched Faith sew patches for the quilt. She didn't make a sound when hail beat down on the roof or when spring rains blew in and soaked her feathers. She made just a little clock when coyotes howled at night, but how Josephina fussed when they crossed rivers. One day they came to a wide, muddy river. Josephina made so much noise that Faith had to take her out of the cage. She held her close. It's all right, Faith crooned. Pa was driving the oxen into the river when swoo, squash! A back wheel sank into a hole. Faith let go of Josephina. Josephina fell into the river. The current carried her away. Help! Cried Faith. Save Josephina! Adam jumped into the river, but the current was too strong. It took 3 men to get them out. That does it! Pa shouted. She is too old to lay eggs, too tough to eat, and she falls into rivers. Out she goes! Just then Josephina ruffled her feathers, let out a proud cackle, cackle, and laid a beautiful big white egg. By thunder, Pa said, she has begun to lay eggs again. Wonderful, said Ma. Now we will have fresh eggs. So Josephina stayed. Faith found a white scrap for the egg patch. Rubbers! Spring turned into summer. The desert was hot and dry. Faith counted her patches. Now she had 15. It was time to sew one about the desert. But one bad thing came after her. Wagon wheels kept falling off. There was not enough food for the animals. Then 3 oxen died. Pa had to throw out his heavy tools and Ma's black iron stove. 2 old people died. They were buried beside the trail. Nobody laughed or sang or smiled anymore. Faith was already hungry, but she walked on and on. She looked for grain or seeds for Josephina. It was worse in the hills. The trail was rocky and steep. One morning, Indians came to trade buffalo meat and water. They wanted Ma's quilts. Never, said Ma. I would rather starve. They wanted Josephina. Never, cried Faith. I would rather die. So Pa traded extra clothes for food and water. Everyone felt better after a good meal. Soon the food was gone. If those Indians come back, Pa told Faith, we must trade Josephina for water. Faith prayed hard that they would never return. That night was bitter cold. Ben slept under the wagons. Ma gave the quilts to Pa and Adam. She and Faith bundled in old blankets. About midnight, 2 robbers crept into camp. They sneaked up to the wagon. When they reached for the quilts, Josephina heard them. Cackle, 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 she squawked. Everyone woke up and the robbers ran away. Pa laughed for the first time in days. Josephina may be old, he said, but she is a humdinger of a watchdog. Goodbye, Josephina. Pa reached for the cage to thank Josephina, but the poor old hen was lying on the cage floor. Faith hid her face against Ma. You must be brave, Ma said softly. Josephina lived a good long life. You can be proud of her. Pa added. She died helping us, said Adam. Faith did not feel better. She cried and cried. Ma hugged her for a long time. The next morning they had a funeral for Josephina. Faith wrapped her in the prettiest scrap of cloth. Adam buried her under a tall pine tree. I miss her so, Faith said between sobs. At last, Faith dried her eyes and reached for the rag bag. I will sew a pine tree patch for Josephina, she said. Soon the wagon train found food and water. When they reached California, Faith finished the patches. Pa built a quilting frame in their new cabin. The family helped Faith stitch the patches together into a quilt. The quilt covered Faith's bed. Every day the patches helped them remember the good times and the bad times on the wagon train. And every night Faith felt warm and happy under the Josephina story quilt. Bye-bye.